Looking for a cosmic adventure like no other? Zatswan, Multiversal Guardian is a high-stakes comic book journey through the multiverse with stunning art and an unforgettable hero. Get your copy today in ebook and paperback formats. Link in the description.
Hi everybody, this is Neil Allen, the creator behind Zatswan Multiversal Guardian. Pick this up on Amazon in the link in the description, and if you do, please leave reviews. That's very helpful. And I've been watching a lot of fans get upset at Marvel Comics for not allowing Peter Parker to get married to Mary Jane. See, like way back in about 1987 or so, Peter was married to Mary Jane, but Marvel dissolved that with a ridiculous storyline, where Peter essentially made a deal with the character you could say is like an analog for the devil, to take away the last 15 years of Peter's life, which dissolved his marriage. And fans have been holding out hope that Marvel will eventually restore this, but Marvel officials are essentially coming out and saying, like, no, that's not going to happen, and Peter Parker should never get married. And it's caused quite a bit of discussion. This is nothing new. This is something that's been going on for a while. And there's ebbs and flows when it gets a bit more, the fans get a bit more antsy about this. And I wanted to give my thoughts about this, and it makes me think of a lot of other things too, like this never ending story model and its viability, the comics aging up with the readers, like the content of the comics. There are a lot of interesting topics that this incident here touches on. Now, first of all, I will get to the core of the discussion. Do I believe that do I think Marvel should have dissolved Peter Parker's marriage to Mary Jane? No, I don't think so. I think that is cheating the readers a bit in this particular instance, because the readers saw all of that development happen on the page. There are certain things that I don't think should happen with some of these characters. Like, I don't think Superman and Batman should be dads. Uh, one of the Because conversely, if we look at the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane versus like Superman and Batman being fathers in the comics, which they are now, Superman and Batman's kids, we didn't see those developments happen on the stage. They were just dads all of a sudden, more or less. These kids just came out of nowhere. Like, Superman suddenly has like a 10-year-old son, and readers did not see those developments. So, I don't really think Superman should be a dad. I don't think that's a good status quo. It's very, very binding, because once you commit to something like that, a kid, probably even more so than a marriage, getting rid of that character can be very, very messy. As we've seen, like, DC doesn't know how to handle this John Kent character, like Superman's kid. It's been very, very messy. And, same with Black Lightning. Readers did not see those develop. Black Lightning has these, like, grown or near grown daughters, and that ages the character up about 20 years. And the daughters were just suddenly there. Readers didn't see, like, this growth and this development. So, getting rid of all of those characters, I don't really feel is cheating the readers too much. And I don't think that those characters should be fathers anyway. Of course, other people feel differently. I know that. And if you feel differently, feel free to tell me in the comment section. I will read and listen. But in the case of Spider-Man's marriage here, interestingly, readers saw all of that develop organically. They were right along with Peter Parker during all his struggles, and there's a lot of investment built up there, and it was done very well and very organically. I don't think Marvel should have dissolved that. However, I see why Marvel does, and it's because, who do you want to appeal to with this character Spider-Man, really? Like, do you want to appeal to middle-aged guys with families? I don't That was never the intent with Peter Parker. That was never what was intended by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Um, the reason why Peter Parker got so popular is because the readers who were kids and, like, young teens really related with the character, whereas characters like Bruce Wayne and Superman weren't as relatable to the reader as Peter Parker. Now, interestingly, the reader has not aged out of the demographic here. The reader has aged up, and the reader is wanting Peter Parker to age along with them. And that puts like Marvel and Disney in an interesting spot here because, I don't necessarily think they want that. And you can kind of tell when you look at the adaptations that they make with the character. Now, like I said, a lot of fans have gotten upset at senior Marvel Comics editor Tom Brevoort or somebody like that, but I don't think those are that's just a stooge. This is probably at this point, it wouldn't surprise me if it was like a mandate set in place by Disney. You know, Disney has a lot of stake in the character of Spider-Man, and let me go back to those adaptations that Disney does. Whenever Peter Parker, it's a major adaptation of Peter Parker, and he's the main character. You're not gonna, they don't adapt that marriage stuff. They never do that. I've only seen that done. Maybe I've missed something. Feel free to let me know if I have. I've only seen that done one time, and that was Spider-Man 94, the cartoon show where Peter Parker pseudo got married to Mary Jane. She was a clone, and she dissolved. She literally dissolved. I mean, like, she disappeared. She evaporated. So it wasn't the real Mary Jane that he got wed to. I know the story sounds pretty crazy. Um, and interestingly enough, that was when the show was winding down. It was like the show was literally, that wasn't the final episode, but it did happen, I do believe, in the final season, and the show was definitely in its twilight when that event happened. So, it does kind of allude to that sort of being the end game, like a character like Peter Parker. He gets married to, Mary Jane, his love interest, and he settles down, similar to a character like Archie. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't that seem like it would be the end of Archie? Like, who's he really gonna choose, Betty or Veronica? You know what I mean? Yes, you can write stories after that, but I think when people think of a character like Archie, you mainly think of him being caught between these two girls. And when you think of a character like Peter Parker, I think what people think about is him living with Aunt May, taking a bunch of flack from J. Jonah Jameson, trying to juggle, like dating some girl, various his love interests have been Liz Allen, Deborah Whitman, um, Felicia, Mary Jane. You know what I mean? Like, juggling this and failing many many times. When you actually wed him to Mary Jane, you do lose a lot of those aspects that made Peter Parker endearing to people in the first place. That's not to say you can't write captivating stories with him, but I think you can. There's nothing saying that suddenly the character is gone, but let me give you a bit of a story, my own background here. I think when I started to buy the Amazing Spider-Man regularly, I had older family members who had the Todd McFarlane comics, but when I was a kid, but when I actually started picking up the Amazing Spider-Man, I was a kid, and it was around issue 500. J. Michael Straczynski was doing the book with John Romita Jr., and I picked up these comics, and I was already very familiar with Spider-Man. And, I was reading these things, and he's a school teacher, and he's married, and as a kid, maybe if I went back and read those comic books now, I would feel different. But maybe you can say, maybe if I went back and read them now, I'd be a bit more fair, you can say. But as kind of an unfair kid, I was reading these comics and I was like, you know what, these comics are kind of boring to me. They don't have the life that I'm familiar with from Spider-Man. You know, this wasn't the status quo I was familiar with, and it wasn't the status quo I wanted to see. Like, Mary Jane was fine. Like, I never had a problem with Mary Jane. Being married to Mary Jane was a little different. Him being a school teacher was different. Like, you know, I'm just saying, like, my unfair self as a kid. I was like, this is kind of boring and this isn't what I wanted to see. And, I do think that fans will get antsy for those elements of Spider-Man that they love. That's why, because, fans will start to think, like, if say the marriage with Mary Jane went on and on and on, a hypothetical I can really imagine. And this did actually happen. I would say fans would start getting nostalgic and antsy for those times when Peter was more footloose, lived with Aunt May. Norman Osborn was still alive because people want to see Spider-Man fight his arch nemesis. And that's why a comic like the original Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Michael Bendis was so popular. I think one of the big reasons it brought back a lot of those elements that or that people really love about Peter Parker. And I'm going on this kind of long-winded thing to say is that I understand why Marvel does not want Peter Parker to get married. I'm not saying I condone that. I'm not saying I think it's like the wise decision to make, but I do fully understand it because that's not the image they want to put forward of Spider-Man. Now, interestingly, the people who read Spider-Man comics now, probably a big portion of them are like 40 to 50 white guys that have beards, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think, those people deserve entertainment just like everybody else, and they deserve comics just like everybody else. But the interesting thing is that Disney's put in a spot because who do you want to appeal to here? Do you want to appeal to those people, or do you want to take the overall image of Spider-Man you're putting forward? You know what I mean? And, keep him in line with the overall image of him you're putting forward, like in movies, in merchandising, the stories of Spider-Man you want to tell. They're never telling that married stuff when they adapt Spider-Man. That's not the image of Spider-Man they want to put forward because they probably feel they wouldn't hit the those aren't the demographics they're going for with a character like Spider-Man. That's obvious. That's why they don't do it. They never adapt Spider-Man as like a family man. Not starting out and not in any major film or cartoon show. The one exception was the '94 cartoon show, and that was when the '94 cartoon show was coming to an end. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to be able to get into this as much as I would like, but this does bring forth it does touch upon the element of these never ending stories, you know what I mean? Like that go on and on and on forever. I've definitely talked to people who feel that all stories need to end. They need to come to an end. And maybe, why newer readers don't come to a character like Spider-Man, and probably the bulk of his readership is made up of people who've been reading him for 40 years and expect him to age up with them, is because like newer readers, because maybe a character like Spider-Man, people are okay with visiting that concept every so often, but maybe they don't want to read this thing where the character never ends and it's the same thing over and over and over again. But when the publisher does change it up, then it starts becoming something you don't want to see either because it doesn't resemble the stuff you came to love about that character. You know what I mean? So that's kind of an interesting dilemma. But yeah, I did have some thoughts about the Mary Jane and Spider-Man marriage. I don't think that Marvel should have dissolved it. I do understand why Marvel doesn't bring it back. How they should go ahead moving forward, they should probably just put the marriage back. but because it is cheating the fan. The way that they handled that particular situation was cheating the fans. I would like to make have another discussion related to this one about all these these dad characters that are in the comics these days. Like Aquaman's a dad, Wally West the Flash is a dad, Superman's a dad, Black Lightning's a dad, Spider-Man's a dad sometimes, Batman's a dad. Like, you're now making comics for dads, and I understand that because dads are probably the main ones like reading your comics, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think it shows that when you have these characters that were originally meant to appeal to kids, and now you're writing them for dads, something fell out of whack, and that's a whole other, it's a related topic, but we're not going to have the opportunity to get into it this time. Why don't we save that for a future date and continue this discussion? Let me know what you think about the topics that we talked about here, from, the Spider-Man Mary Jane marriage. Where do you sit on that? Sit on that issue? How do you feel about these never-ending story models? Um, Let me know in the comments, and again, please pick up Zatswan Multiversal Guardian on Amazon, and please leave reviews on Amazon. That really helps other people find the book. And I will talk to you again very soon. Make sure to like, comment, and share as well. See ya.